Hey there, today we're going to be talking about One Piece. We're on a break this week, so just wanted to go over the last, 10, 15 chapters and go through the satellite's actions and see if we can determine who is the saboteur among them. Spoiler warning for everything up to chapter 1076. If you're not caught up with the manga, go ahead and catch up, then come back and watch this video, join our discussion, let us know what you think about who the saboteur is in the comments below. So while I was rereading, I came across some things that I believe are potential motivations, and I want to cover them here because motivation is a very solid foundation to judge someone's actions or predict someone's actions. It's one thing to know what someone has done, it's a whole other thing to know why they are doing it. So number one is Vegapunk, the main body, Stella's desire for progress and the preservation of knowledge. Number two, the rest of the crew members, and Jinbei in particular, Jinbei, Bonnie, Robin, all of them are talking to Vegapunk after he's talking about progress and saying, you gotta think about the danger that progress could pose to people and the people that are in harm's way. Number three, Vegapunk seems to dismiss this as not really something worth worrying about. Any good scientist can ignore all of the hazards, potential hazards, in order to make sure that we progress. That's the most important thing, is that progress happens. And lastly, in the flashback, when we see Vegapunk talking to Dragon, we get another little glimpse of his motivation. Vegapunk is offered to join the Revolutionary Army, which he says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but they can't afford him. They don't have enough money to fund his research. And without his research, even with all that knowledge, Vegapunk really can't do anything. So he decides to stick with the government because they pay the bills. They keep the lights on. They buy all the materials. They make sure that he's bankrolled so he can do all of the crazy things that he is doing. We wouldn't see nearly half of the tech that we see on Egghead Island without the government. So he's kind of an ends justify the means. And that's fine, I guess, for certain people, but we see, obviously, that this really does have consequences. Namely, Bonnie and Kuma. Like, obviously, Bonnie is tore up. Her life has been turned upside down. She's taken on a life of crime. She's left her kingdom, traveled the world. Hopefully, she has a good ending to this story. But this has obviously caused a lot of heartache. And hopefully Vegapunk got something out of this, or Kuma got something out of this. Either way, there's no way you can deny that progress does hurt sometimes. In that very same chapter, we see Vegapunk come face to face with his failures. While Bonnie is holding a sword to him, or lightsaber if you will, he screams and says, oh, this is a failure, watch out, you don't know what you're holding. This seems to be like a normal lightsaber, and it's activated, and it definitely seems like it's gonna cut. We see Bonnie use it to cut something before, and she's like, what do you mean? This is going to be working fine. We all know how it happens. It attracts all the bugs on the island to her, swarming her and knocking her unconscious. And he is relieved at how he is saved by one of his failed inventions, before he goes on to discuss another failed invention, the artificial devil fruit for Mononosuke. Well, he wanted it to be blue, but it came out pink. Other than the fact that it's pink and not blue, it's a perfect replica, a perfect copy of that fruit, but he still considers it a failure. Now I think this is foreshadowing for another failure that maybe he's not aware of. Maybe the satellites. And maybe it's not a failure like we think, like pink or blue or whatever, attracting all the bugs. Maybe it's working just like he thought, but he didn't really think about all of the consequences of splitting your body or your brain into 6 different parts, or each of them having 6 different motivations and goals, so on and so forth. I like the idea that they go off, they do their own jobs, and they come back together and all that information is collected. But you have an evil one. You have a wrath one. You have one that's logic. You have one that's wisdom. You have one that's desire. All of these different desires, especially not checked by each other, not in an intangible way anyway, can just run off and do their own things, which could be bad. And this is probably why we're seeing saboteurs inside Egghead Island. So when we're judging only their actions, we can just ignore York, because we very clearly see her actions. She just eats, poops, and sleeps. Now, it would be very Oda to have her be the saboteur, but she hasn't really expressed or shown any kind of other desires, even though she is the Vegapunk of desires, other than just to eat, sleep, and poop. And I bet you at night she gets turned up too, probably a little, you know what I mean, a little, but who knows, you know? I don't think it's York. It's simple to say that. We're just gonna move on past York. We also see Atlas almost right away, not with the other party. We see them with Luffy and Chopper and Bonnie. And who else is there? Oh, Jinbei. We see them interacting in a way that just seems nice and wholesome. She seems to be welcoming there. It seems like Atlas's role is kind of just to manage the workers and the place. Maybe that's the best place for her wrath, because they probably fear her wrath and get to work a lot quicker. But the entire time she's with Strawhat and the rest of the gang, and she's never left alone. And then she gets taken out by Lucci later on, and then she's fixed and then comes back. So almost no time, especially when the sabotaging going on, is she alone, separated, doing anything or saying anything that makes it seem like she might be one of the saboteurs. So I'm also going to be removing her from my suspect list. She's not going to be the one. So that leaves 4 really serious suspects, and we're going to go through each of them just to discuss really quickly why I think it could or could not be them. First, Edison. He seems like he's like really tiny. He seems to be like hyperactive too, and he always has a new invention. Like almost every time we see him, he seems to like, oh, I got an idea for a new invention. I want to go. So as far as the motivations that I discussed earlier, he may be the main one that is basically holding on to that need for funding, because he's got inventions. He's the one that makes it happen. So he and Lilith led the Straw Hats into a room with S-Shark, seemingly like setting them up for an ambush, basically, because they got attacked right away. Jinbei, S-Shark, dove into the water using his new fruit, jumped out of there, and then grabbed Nami by the throat and was immediately attacked by Sanji and Robin. This was a blatant setup by Edison and Lilith. We see them collecting data on the battle too. They're happy to receive this data. They haven't seen the Seraphim put to such a test yet, so this is just exciting for them. Now at first, this was a red flag. I'm just like, well, they just walked him into a trap. But, I mean, we've already heard about their desire for progress and the fact that these are just pirates, so it's just kind of on brand for them to be testing out their experiments with some meaningless, non-important pirates. At that point, they didn't know that they were going to be hitching a ride with them off the island. But, you know, this doesn't seem as bad in hindsight. Lilith and Edison both go to stop the Seraphim from attacking any further. So they're focused on that. They go out there right away while Shaka stays back. After a little bit of a scuffle, they are successful in shutting down the Seraphim. And Lilith is the one that gives them the order to stop. So if she really wanted to sabotage or cause harm to their cause, and honestly, they don't really know what their motivations are right now. They don't really know where they're going. So this would be a reason for them to just, you know, let the Seraphim do what they're going to do, unless that's to kill them. But it could be self-preservation, I guess. But stopping the Seraphim here just didn't seem like something a saboteur would do. Maybe they could go hide somewhere else. There's many other places. They ran right into the danger and put themselves on the line to stop the Seraphim. So I would say that Edison and Lilith are less likely the saboteur in my eyes. So after they stop the Seraphim and Stussy knocks out Kaku and Lucci, they all go back into the room and notice that Stella is missing. The Stella is missing. And in this room, when they notice that he's missing, we get Shaka, Atlas, restored Atlas, by the way, after she's been repaired, York, and Lilith. So these 4 are obviously not going to be doing what happens next, the explosion with Pythagoras. Apparently Pythagoras went on to go look for the Stella, and he's unsuccessful, or at least that's what he's saying. And he gets exploded. And elsewhere, while this explosion is going on, we see Nami with Edison stealing gems or taking gems. So he's obviously preoccupied. He didn't blow up Pythagoras, okay? Now, everybody seems to be thinking that it is Shaka, all right? So I am going to go through Shaka's in detail from the beginning, because I feel like he is the one who is highlighted more than anybody else. He seems to be the leader, so you figured that he would be controlling everybody else, but we all know that's not always the case. And he seems to be the one who is after, I believe he is the logic one or the wisdom one, but everybody just keeps calling him the good one. Even Lilith gets up in his face calling him a goody goody, but she also says act goody goody. So we're going to see if he is just putting up an act by judging his actions. So Shaka is the only one to turn on the restraints in the suits, shutting basically all the movement down for the Straw Hats when he was discussing the Void Century, casually mentioning that anybody who has knowledge of this gets hunted down and killed by the government. And Usopp is like, why would you tell us this? I can't forget this. So he's basically just giving them information that puts a target on their back right away. All looking very bad just based on what that is right there. After this though, he does move them forcefully to continue on his conversation, but then he does speak to Lucci and refuses to allow them to come on and capture anybody or do anything. Just let them have their way. He refuses, knowing that it's going to start a fight, but he does so anyway. Shaka also gains control of the situation by literally commanding the other satellites to act. So this is what I'm talking about when I say that he seems to be the one who's in control. This right here is the first time where he's really just literally giving out commands to other satellites, besides when he told Lilith to bring the Straw Hats on land. When the dome is sabotaged, he is the one who questions why someone would do this. So he doesn't think right away, or at least he doesn't say, oh, this is a mistake, this is an error. Maybe he just is very confident in his tech. He says, why would someone do this? So he is at least suspicious of a saboteur right away, and he's trying to find out the motive. So when Kaku attacks the ship, Usopp, rightfully so, is just like, Zoro's got this. Zoro and Brook, they're at the ship. We're not in any danger. No need to go out there. They've got this handled. But Shaka tells them, no, this is a little bit more of a dangerous situation than you might believe. They're a little bit more outnumbered than you think. And that's when we see that the Seraphim have joined CP0 in this fight. This is something that a saboteur would not do. He would just let them assume that, oh, they got this, and then watch the Straw Hats get eliminated. Unless, of course, the Straw Hats being eliminated is not necessarily the saboteur's goal. But I still don't think that there would be any reason for him to try to help them or even give this information. Later, he is the one to notice the shadowy figures. He's watching everything unfold, and he does genuinely seem to be helpless. Like, he's just like, what is going on out there? There's something else here. And he is the one to notice that somebody else, besides everybody that was accounted for, the Seraphim, the CP0, the Straw Hats, the satellites, and the Stella, and all the workers, there's somebody else in there that's running around causing problems. Did anybody check on Hattori? Is it maybe the pigeon running around killing everybody? Or maybe it's not a pigeon at all. Maybe it's a Zoan fruit user who has just always been casually on there. Probably just for information's sake. They don't think it's a threat. Anyway, I'm not going to get into details, but it could be Hattori. Now we're caught up basically to what's happening. We know there's a saboteur. Pythagoras got exploded, but everybody so far that I've mentioned just doesn't seem to be the ones that fit the bill. Edison, I was really curious about him. He seems to just be wandering off, but I feel like he's just that hyperactive. He's always got ideas. Every time we see him though, he just seems to be there in the middle, not really doing anything. I don't get a sense of a threat from him. I could be wrong. But I want to tell you about who I really think is the saboteur, the betrayer, Pythagoras. And I'm going to go through all of Pythagoras' actions so that we can see that he is the one who is most suspicious. I don't know about his motivations as much as anybody else, but he has done some things that is like subtly shady, and he does them in chapters where we easily get distracted by something fantastic happening right after what he does. Like when we get Dragon in a chapter, or when we go see Shanks afterwards, or even when we hear that Jaguar D. Saul is still alive. These things distracted us to be like, oh, but secretly Pythagoras is just doing some shady shit right there on the page, and we're ignoring it. So Pythagoras, first thing that I noticed that he did was that he mentioned that nobody could get up here, but CP0 and the Seraphim couldn't really get access to this level because of the Frontier Dome. He brought up the Frontier Dome before pretty much anybody besides Stussy said anything about it. Pythagoras is also the one who initiated Vegapunk calling to a friend to help. We don't know who this friend is. Many people have theories about who it could be, but they're obviously someone who's on the island, and Vegapunk calls, asks for help, and after confirmation that help is coming, the Frontier Dome goes down. So after the dome goes down, and CP0 and the Seraphim and some of the agents jump up and get up into the dome, or get up on the level, Pythagoras is the one who gets the dome operational again, which I feel like almost all of them should have been working and try to scramble and get that up. If that's what you see in the movies, when something goes down, if like a spaceship's shield go down, everybody's frantic, or the engineers are trying to frantically get that up and running. So maybe that was just his role and he did it, but that also means that it going down could potentially be his fault as well, if he's responsible for maintaining it. Later, when the Stella goes missing, he is the one who goes and searches for him. And while he's looking and saying, oh, level 3 is clear, we're good here, nobody's here, he's the one, hears a little click-clack behind him, turns to look, and gets blown up. Later, we find his body smoking, and we worry that he's down, but his head apparently can come off. We even see in a few panels before that his head just comes off whenever he wants to. It's got his own legs, got his own arms. So his body, I don't really know, maybe it's just like a power source for him. Doesn't really need his body at all. And he's perfectly fine. And his body really doesn't even look that messed up also. He took a pretty big explosion. By the end of that chapter, it looked like he was done. But he's not. He's perfectly fine. So who did that? And when he's asked what happened, he's being very vague, almost to the point where it seems like he's playing or like making fun of what Oda does with all of these character reveals that he doesn't want to let out. And it just basically buys just enough time for the shit to go down again. And by shit going down, I mean that the Seraphim are now attacking the satellites, which, we know Lilith stopped them from attacking and got them on their side. So that means only another Seraphim can give them attacking orders, or somebody above them, which would be an Elder, a Gorosei. And they're not on the island, so far as we know. It's obviously, again, not York. We already knew it wasn't York, but this is just further proof that it's definitely not York, because she goes, oh, look at the little cutie, whatever, you're so cute, and then gets turned into stone, like an idiot. So it can't be York, unless York's planning on getting turned into stone so that she's taken out of the contention of being one of the baddies. I don't know. That would be like some ridiculously high IQ level moves from York if that's what she was doing. Way smarter than Vegapunk. Because that's obviously the smartest Vegapunk if she's doing all of that. Pythagoras then goes on to say, York, get out of there! Get away from her! Right before she's turned to stone, but it's just too late. Almost everything I've noticed from now on, Pythagoras just seems to be yelling out redundant things. Get away from her. Okay, that's not really doing anything. He could have tried to order the Seraphim to stand down, but he didn't. If he thought that she was a threat, he could have said, Seraphim, stand down. Snake, stand down. He didn't do that. He said, get away from her. He even says, York, get away from her. Meaning that it could be that he knew that because he was the one who issued a command, that if he yelled, get away from her, the Seraphim might take that as an order and stop doing what it was about to do. Later, we see Lilith try to give a command and it doesn't listen. And Edison says, yeah, I know, it's not accepting our orders, but he never tried to give it a command. I don't see anywhere where he tries to command the Seraphim to do anything. We even see later Shaka attempts to try to stop S-Hawk, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work for him. So it can't be Shaka, because he's not the one who gave the initial command. Pythagoras is the only one to confirm be alone. He had the ability to do it. Plus he's got like a robot body. Who knows what kind of controls for the entire lab that he has within him. He got hands and legs inside of him, so maybe his robot body is like a little mini command center and he can control it within his own body. Also, this is when I noticed that everyone else has clear defined roles. Shaka is the leader, Lilith is security, York is Edison is the inventor, and Atlas seems to be like the manager. He's running day-to-day operations. What does Pythagoras do? He's supposed to represent wisdom. Sometimes wisdom, just without any other kinds of emotions, can lead you down to do some stupid things. It may be wise to not mess with the government. And you could take that as wisdom. I guess at the end of the day, wisdom, depending on like what you would consider wisdom, could be an opinion. And if he's come up to the conclusion that fighting against the world government is not wise, and that in order to keep the progress or maintain the progress or continue to progress in the future and maintain all this knowledge and avoid a void century again, maybe it would be best to stick with the government and work with them. And this made me think about the earlier conversation between the Stella and the Straw Hats when they were talking about progress and how progress without, barriers or gates or just something to prevent all of the hazards from happening hurts people. You can't just have progress for nothing. This is Vegapunk led by logic alone and not by wisdom. And maybe this is wisdom's attempt and trying to get a little bit more control and take over things that he can't control. And maybe this is probably one of Vegapunk's biggest weaknesses coming back to haunt him. He split up all his brain into different personality types, whereas he himself is led by logic, and it's kind of reflected that Shaka is leading the team, seemingly. But wisdom knows or believes that the way to go is in his own interest, to make sure that they preserve everything that they've gained, all the knowledge, and that they continue to progress, and that they avoid a void century from happening again. I would believe in that motivation. I would believe that if you really sat down and argued with even Vegapunk, he would probably go for that. And maybe not with all of the other, emotions weighing in on him, but wisdom alone, that might be the wisest thing to do. I mean, nobody succeeds against the government, not for 900 years, 800 years. So why try to mess with them now? And they had all this technology way back then, and they still lost. So why mess with them? And also, maybe there's something that the Vegapunk knows that we don't know about the potential technological advances of the world government that they're just keeping away. And we see an example of this technological advance in Egghead Island. It got completely wiped out. Maybe Vegapunk doesn't have an answer for that happening to him as well, and is trying to avoid it. I don't know, but who knows? At the end of the day, I believe it's Pythagoras. Just everything that he's done, in hindsight, just looks more and more shady, especially when he was discussing with Vegapunk. It's almost like he was mind controlling him. He says, "Oh, don't worry, they can't get up here. We're safe. But we're also trapped because we can't leave here either because of the laser. So the thing that's keeping us safe is trapping us. So checkmate, Pythagoras, right? Like, he's got them." Then he's like, "Hey, we can probably ask for help though, right?" And Vegapunk does that. And immediately after, all of these things start happening. So maybe it's not anything that I mentioned before as far as the motivation. Maybe Pythagoras is really trying to draw out that secret ally and give them up to the world government in order to continue his research or to continue the status quo as it is, maybe with Pythagoras running the show instead of Shaka. Who knows? But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, like it, and I'll see you next week.